Roxy, I take it you're in a stressful season. You have a wedding 6 weeks from now, an upcoming move, and a dog with a anxious attachment style.
Ooh.
So how are you avoiding burnout right now?
Have you heard of CBD gummies?
I have. Are these for you or for Oliver?
Yes. And also exercise, sleep, and screaming into a pillow.
Well, I don't want you to be a burnt out bride, which is why we and some other friends spent a lot of time in the hot tub this last weekend.
Take me back to the bubbles and the bubbly.
From Religion News Service, this is Saved by the City, a podcast from two Christian women staying afloat amid the swift currents of New York. I'm Caitlin Beatty.
And I'm Roxy Stone. For real, this last weekend was amazing. It gave me a little extra oomph to get to the finish line of the wedding. And for those of you who have not figured out what we're talking about what is traditionally known as a bachelorette weekend. Although all of the attendees were not bachelorettes.
Oh, that's true.
In addition to some married women, there was also a man. So,
yeah, who has a very special place in the wedding, as I understand it. So I'd never been to a bachelorette weekend before.
Oh, really? I guess I've only been to, I've been to two others.
It was akin to like a destination wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so fun. It was a blast. I mean, we had the hot tub, great food. We had an unplanned karaoke outing one night.
Which will surprise none of our listeners.
But okay, I want to go on record. I did not plan this.
No, you didn't.
I feel that the Lord put it
provided
in our path.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was truly just in our path. We were headed somewhere else, and the sounds, the music coming from the karaoke bar drew us in.
Yes. And there were like two other bachelorette parties there. It was perfect.
Which was very surprising. It's not like we were in Nashville or Austin. Right. We were in Park City, Utah, which is not where I think of like a bachelorette destination. But I guess if you live in Utah, that's the place to go.
Yeah, it was cool.
It was fun to be in the mountains. It was beautiful.
It was really beautiful. I guess there's just something about like sitting in hot water with your friends drinking.
It's true.
It was like the hot tub was the highlight for me. Mm-hmm. And I gather that you and your fiance are approaching your wedding as a time to celebrate the important people in your lives.
Yeah, I think so. You know, everybody tells you, oh, it's your wedding. And it is. And you like want things that feel special and stuff. But also, like, when do you get to bring so many people that you love together in one place and throw a big party for them? Which the Bachelorette was like a little taste of that. Like these close friends from all over the country that I really adore and have meant a lot to me at different points in my life through a lot of years. Some of them who'd never met each other. So that was fun. And then the wedding is like a bigger version of that, you know? So it definitely is like, how do you make it fun and special for, you know, people who are investing time and money and emotion into coming. So
what are you most looking forward to the day of the wedding?
A lot of things, but I'm really excited about the ceremony. I don't know why. That's like one of the things I picture the most is like being at an altar and like the whole, I don't know, we're doing it big. Like we're really doing the whole Episcopal service. So prepare yourself.
I mean, why would anybody do anything otherwise? It's the most beautiful liturgy.
It really is, but it's like an hour.
It's like a big, big moment of your life, you know?
And I love all the symbolism of the whole ceremony in the Book of Common Prayer, like all of that whole liturgy. We're going to do communion.
Yes,
all the stuff.
It's beautiful.
So.
I heartily approve. So your fiance is a priest. But he's not the only priest / pastor / church leader who is going to be involved in the ceremony. So how many are there going to be total?
Oh, let's see. Okay. As of now,
you might be adding more in the next 6 weeks.
Feels like, who knows? There are 3 priests / pastors involved in the ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And then 4 if you count John, my fiance. I think that's it if you're counting the people like up there in the ceremony. But if you counted how many people are going to be in the pews, it's a baker's dozen at least.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Will there be like a pastor off?
We should talk to the DJ about it. Like not a dance off, a pastor off, but where pastors dance.
Yes, I am not going to miss that. That sounds amazing.
It does strike me that a wedding is probably among the more fun things that pastors get to do as part of their job. Like you get invited to a party. Definitely more fun than like leading a church or listening to people complain about your sermon, receiving emails.
Or providing pastoral care to, I don't know, dozens of people in any given week. Being on vestries doesn't seem super fun always.
Yeah, a bunch of highly opinionated people who also like financially back your church.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels like a particularly thorny time to be a pastor.
Especially during the pandemic and post-pandemic, we've seen a lot of pretty wild statistics and heard stories about pastors who have left the pastorate or are strongly considering leaving ministry. They are just overwhelmed with the expectations placed on their job, exhausted, lonely. Like we've definitely talked before about the lonely at the top phenomenon, kind of expected to be the one that runs the show. So this has all led to what many people have called, and by many people, I think maybe I just mean us.
We coined
but
it.
I'm sure we could find articles that use this, the big pastoral burnout. So what do we think's going on here?
Well, let's play armchair sociologist, shall we?
We're good at doing armchair whatever. That's kind of the point of a podcast.
It's what our listeners appreciate the most, you know. Half-informed opinions.
That sound true-ish.
Well, it is true. You know, we've seen a lot of pastors either leaving their positions or saying that they have contemplated leaving in the past year or two. A lot of them cite they're not getting paid enough, the work week is too long, they're just tired. Sometimes like they lose their faith, which that's not necessarily new. But I think some of what we've seen in particular that's really spiked over the last several years is feeling like the divisions in their church are just too big and that they're constantly in like a no-win situation where no matter what they say from the pulpit, somebody's gonna get upset with them.
Yeah.
And then the COVID pandemic really did a lot of pastors in. And I remember this, John and I were not dating at the time that this happened, but he's talked about it. Like trying to lead a church over Zoom is like really hard to do, turns out.
Yeah.
You know, and he had just started at this church too, where he actually like never met any of his parishioners until like after being there for a year because everything was over soon.
Oh my gosh,
because he started in
awful.
like May of 2020.
Oh gosh, that feels like a really hard job assignment.
Yeah.
Like kind of unfair. Like here's the worst time to try to pastor people.
Yeah. Well, I think he accepted the job in like late February, early March. But then when he started, it was May.
Oh my gosh.
That's also when he moved to New York City, which, oof. You know, it was like you were having to deal with all these government regulations and trying to figure out like, should you meet? When can you meet? Mask, don't mask, sing, don't sing, communion, no communion. Can we meet outside? Like just, and it was just evolving all of the time. Right. And like a huge part of church and a huge part of the calling of a pastor, I think a lot of pastors is like to be in person, to be present in the flesh, like a very embodied kind of profession. And we've talked, I think, for years, even before we had this podcast, we've talked about how important that embodied presence is at a church, that like
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same thing to listen to a sermon on
Mm-hmm.
a podcast. It's not the same thing to listen to worship music while you're driving in your car as
Right.
it is to like sing along with the people beside you or to like attend church and be part of it. And the pandemic stripped that away.
I do wonder if things were like a little bit easier in New York because we really did have state and city government regulations about
Right.
when and how you could meet. So at least pastors could say, like, we don't want to defy the
Right.
civic authorities. Like, this is what we need to do unless we want to get fined. But like in so many other places, because the pandemic was so, I want to say weirdly politicized.
Mm-hmm.
It was a no-win situation for pastors, church leaders trying to make these decisions that could really affect people's lives in multiple directions. You don't want to put vulnerable people at risk by gathering. And also there was the cost of the disconnection, loneliness, isolation. I hung on to Zoom church for a month tops. And I was like, I'm out. I can't do it.
You know, and then some pastors had a lot of people dying. They were literally doing more funerals than normal.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine how exhausting and just like emotionally difficult that kind of labor would be.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like doing last rites for somebody over Zoom.
I forgot that we did that. I guess we had to do that, but it's so awful.
Yeah. Oh, and then of course you had the racial justice protests and everyone in your church expecting you to say something about it, but maybe not wanting you to say the same things. You know?
Yeah. We want you to say something. Oh, nope, not that.
Not that.
Oh, not that either. Like,
yeah. And then January 6th happened. I mean, it was just like so much. And yeah, I feel like pastors really ended up being kind of at the heart of that.
And also not saying something can feel like an abnegation of leadership. People in my church want direction on kind of how to think about these huge issues, or they want to know how to think about this as a person of Christian faith. That's part of my job. But gosh, it would just be nice if I could just kind of avoid some of these issues. But then is that cowardly?
Yeah.
Or shirking a particular responsibility that a church leader has?
I feel like the pulpit got very politicized in the last 9 years.
Well, except that I know we've complained about pastors who never acknowledged certain political things from the pulpit.
But that felt political, you know?
I see what you're saying.
Like, I think pre-Trump, I don't know. There was eras before that too. This is not new, but this has become more pronounced.
Even in churches that have more of a liturgical flair or have a diversity of types of church leaders, it's too easy to think about the lead pastor as kind of the most important person in the room. And so much rises and falls on what they say or don't say and do or don't do. And like we kind of want the top-down thing so that we're less responsible for what happens.
Right. And, you know, I think there are plenty of pastors who think of themselves that way too. But it's a culture that we've created. I think maybe it's more acute in evangelical churches, but I think it's true outside of that as well, like this centering of the pastor and a church really feeling built around a pastor. And I think pastors, that's a lot of pressure to feel like you have to be this voice for your people.
I think leading a church is a distinct calling.
And a different kind of job than a 9-to-5.
Yeah, and I think I want to preserve that distinction. But I also can see how easily that leads to pastors having no boundaries.
I mean, you can't draw really good boundaries about like, oh, I can't show up for that person in the hospital at midnight. Like, that's just like when it happens, you know? So that can be hard.
But what else can church members and congregants do differently to tangibly support their leaders?
We'll get to that soon with help from our guest today, Rich Villodas, who's been a pastor at New Life Fellowship, a multi-ethnic congregation here in New York for 16 years. He has some thoughts on, well, all of these questions on pastoral burnout and congregational support and politicizing the pulpit and so much more. Religion News Service is an independent, award-winning source of global reporting on religion, spirituality, culture, and ethics.
From pastors to prophets to rabbis to imams to internet gurus, RNS covers the people who are leading faith communities in the modern world.
And be sure to check out Religion News Service's other podcast offerings. We've got Martini Judaism with Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin and The State of Belief with Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch. And Amber Hacker and Tom Levinson present the newest edition, Money Meets Meaning, exploring the intersection of faith and finance. Check them out.
Also send us your ideas for next season. We're getting ready to wrap up this one, but we're already thinking about the next one, kind of. And we want to hear what you want to hear about and who you want to hear from. So shoot us an email at sbtcpodcast@religionnews.com and be sure to leave a rating or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're grateful to be joined by pastor, author, and fellow New Yorker, Rich Villodas. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Rich.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation and look forward to a good conversation with you.
I just realized, saying fellow New Yorker, I don't think that Roxy and I are officially New Yorkers, at least compared with you.
33 years is a long time.
I have certification stamp. I can really let people know if they're certified New Yorkers. So how long have you been in the city?
I have only been here since the end of 2018. So coming up on 6 years. Now, I will say the fact that I stayed during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I feel like that gave me a couple more years.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. You definitely get city cred because of that.
Pandemic was dog years.
Yeah.
I moved here in 2014. I did leave for about a year and a half in the middle of that. So even though I'm coming up on my 10-year, I was like gone for part of it. So, but I was here for the whole pandemic. So
all right. That's got to count for a lot.
Yeah.
For sure.
One of the things that we wanted to talk to you about, Rich, was these waves of scary statistics that have been coming out really, acutely during and after the pandemic about the number of pastors and church leaders who are exiting ministry, and they're talking about burnout. Like, I can't do this anymore. The pressure is too great.
Yeah.
What is driving this exit from pastoral ministry in your observation and experience?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if there's one or two answers to that. I do think this is multifaceted, multi-layered. When I think about it, I think of it in at least four different areas. I think of it from an interpersonal perspective, from an institutional perspective, and a larger cultural perspective. And so from a personal perspective, I think lots of, to pastor people, whether it's 50 people, whether it's 500 people, whether it's 5,000 people, is to be invited into a lot of pain and distress. And so people are trusting you with areas of their lives, their pains, their secrets. And so to be on the receiving end of a lot of that, plus preaching, teaching, organizing, there's a lot that's going on here. So sustainability requires a couple of things. I think it requires a life with God that is intentional. But beyond that, I think it requires a commitment to interior examination.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of family of origin stuff that never gets addressed on a pastoral level. And so they're working out their issues as they're leading. And so that's just a personal thing. From an interpersonal thing, I don't know if most pastors are equipped this sounds scary, but I'm not sure if most pastors are equipped to negotiate differences well. And when you are thinking about the landscape of polarization that exists in our world, to have a high level of self-differentiation, meaning one's ability to remain close to myself, remain close to others, especially in times of high anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And plus the loneliness epidemic as well. I think there's an interpersonal reason. Institutionally, I think there are, from like church denominational perspectives, there's lots of pressure that is placed on pastors to reach particular metrics and goals and all of that. So pastors can be seen very much as doing machines, live in a solo hero culture. And then the larger cultural landscape of this church is, the church sizes, the pressure, the need to grow fast. I mean, all of these things combine to lead to lots of folks saying, I don't want this pressure. I could be making more money probably someplace else with less than half the pressure that I'm experiencing in this kind of a role.
You used a phrase that I picked up on that I'm curious about what that means to you at solo hero culture.
Yeah.
What does that mean as a pastor? And what do you think, like when churches sort of set up that dynamic for their pastor, like where do you think that's sort of coming from and how's that being fed by maybe the church itself?
Some of it is self-imposed by the pastor. Some of it is spoken and unspoken assumptions that the church has for the pastor. For example, by just a solo hero, I just mean that the pastor is a singular kind of force that makes the church go around. So it is platform driven, it's personality driven.
Mm-hmm.
If the pastor's there, great. If the pastor's not there, there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this gets expressed in the disappointment. For example, I'm the primary preacher at our church, but we have a preaching team of about 3 to 4 other people.
Mm-hmm.
There are times when, we have great preachers, but some folks, they want to hear from me.
Mm-hmm.
And on a regular basis, I'm not preaching. I'll be in the sanctuary sitting under the teaching of one of our other pastors. And someone would come up to me and say, "Oh, when are you back up again?" It's just a really good, for me, a moment to say, I'm up again in 2 weeks. And it is great that you're here to listen under Pastor so-and-so. And so I have to work hard to say, I'm not going to have you have a secondhand spirituality that's kind of feeding off of me. You need to cultivate your own life with God and whoever God is speaking through in this moment. It's a great pressure that people get comfortable. They want certain things.
Mm-hmm.
As a pastor, I have to be willing to push against that.
And if pastors haven't done that deep interior work or are bringing all sorts of
Yes.
baggage into the pastorate,
Yes.
you can easily see how they would actually want to be the solo hero, that
Mm-hmm.
there would be too much sense of self-worth derived from being the main event. So what needs to be done even before pastors are entering ministry to make sure that they can handle things from a spiritual and psychological perspective and not go down an unhealthy path?
It's a great question, Katelyn, because I think there's certain things that need to be done beforehand, but I think this is a lifestyle of commitment throughout the duration of my pastorate. When I was in seminary, I was exposed to like the genogram, comes out of family systems theory, focusing on the ways that we have inherited positive legacies and negative legacies from our families of origin, and the ways that those, particularly the negative legacies, have a way of showing up in leadership contexts. Now, I did that in seminary before I was pastoring a church, but by the grace of God, when I got to New Life Fellowship Church as a 28-year-old, that was part of the culture as well, that we're going to examine ways that our families of origin continue to shape the way we lead and pastor today. On a month-to-month basis at our church, we are talking about the ways that our families have shaped us, the residue of the negative legacies we've inherited, and the ways that's impacting pastoral ministry. And so there's no one and done thing here. And I'm grateful that I've been part of a culture the last 16 years that has emphasized the ongoing work of formation in this particular area.
So you're a New York lifer.
Yes, indeed.
And you've been a pastor in New York your whole pastoral career.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of pastors come and go in New York. What are some of the unique pressures of being a pastor in New York specifically that do burn a lot of people out?
I love when pastors come from other parts of the country. I think it's great. I think New York needs as many great churches as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, lived there for 33 years, lived in Queens for 10 years. I've lived in Long Island the last 2 years. As we were mentioning before the call, like for the first time in my life, I have like parking, which is just like unbelievable. That's been like my big problem as a pastor, parking. Okay. So because I'm born and raised here, I have a perspective that's very different from someone coming from Dallas or from Atlanta or someone coming from Michigan. This is my life here. And so I have nothing to compare it to from a deep emotional perspective. And so when folks come from other parts of the country where they have big homes, before moving to Long Island, I lived in an 850 square foot apartment with my wife and 2 children. And that was just, it is what it was. I mean, we weren't complaining. It was just like, this is all we've known.
Yeah.
And that sounds pretty big, actually.
I think that's twice the size of my apartment.
It's so funny because folks would come into our apartment in Queens and go, whoa, look at this here. I mean,
Queens is like
you have like a little hallway that goes into the dining room. It takes 3 steps to get into the dining room. This is amazing.
Wait, you had a dining room? Okay, well, I don't know why you moved.
We
Dining
are
room
living
/ play area / Yeah.
And so that notwithstanding, I mean, to pastor in New York City, a couple of things come to mind. One is the pace of life in the city. And so the speed, it just has an impact on your life personally, and then the kind of formation among people within the community. Queens is very different from Manhattan and very different from Brooklyn. So even as boroughs, if Queens was its own independent city, it'd probably be the fourth largest city in the country after
That's
Brooklyn.
incredible.
Yeah.
And so like the scope of where we're at, 2.3 million people living in Queens, it's outrageous, but the immense diversity. Our church has over 75 nations represented in our church, 123
Wow.
languages spoken in the neighborhood. And so the immense diversity from not just an racial, ethnic perspective, but from a political perspective, a generational perspective, it just makes it harder when you have that many different people in the room or in a part of a community to pastor well. And so I think about the pace of life and the immense diversity as pressures in terms of how do we pastor well in this particular context.
So in your new book, The Narrow Path, you're not shying away from hot button issues, money, sex, political, cultural division. And it's one thing to write about those in a book kind of from afar. And it's another thing to try to wade into complex issues and cultural waters in relationship with people in your church as you're trying to lead them. So how do you navigate teaching on topics that can easily divide without becoming a people pleaser?
Well, this has been my ongoing journey of formation here. I mean, I've been at New Life for 16 years. I've been in the lead role for the last 11 years. I have noticed significant progress in my own ability to do this, and yet it's very hard. I've discovered that the deeper or the more polarizing the issue, the more time I need with 3 groups of people in my church before I publicly say anything. And so, for example, I made a lot of mistakes in 2015, 2016, 2017 around matters of race and politics. I didn't believe that anyone would vote for Donald Trump in my church. So in my sermons on social media, I'm saying like a lot of things against Donald Trump, not knowing that these comments now are really impacting people in my church who I would say my pastoral estimate was like 25 to 30% of my church was voting for Donald Trump. And so that was like a rude awakening, a revelation there, which helped me to recognize, number one, I heard a lot of people in the process. And then talking about race as well, I would think, oh yeah, we're a very diverse community. To talk about racism should be pretty easy for us. And I realized that to talk about like individual racial prejudice was pretty easy, but to talk about institutional racism or structural sin was very difficult for those in our community. And so after hurting a number of people by my flippant comments or not recognizing the immense diversity in the room around social political issues, I've adjusted course over the years. And so, for example, last year we did a 10-week series on human sexuality, but that was a year and a half of preparation, meeting with elders over retreats, meeting with our pastoral team, meeting with our leadership community, and just trying to negotiate our differences well and have conversations and listen. That by the time I gave the first message on human sexuality, noting the vast diversity in our church, I felt really confident that, number one, those 3 groups of people, our staff, our elders, our leadership community, at least knew my heart and knew what I was going to be saying. So there was no surprises there. And then we were able to just negotiate our differences in other spaces there. So I think about just a long-term planning and various formational spaces that are required in order to navigate this well, because I know what it's like to, unfortunately, hurt people because I'm not aware of the vast diversity. And so whenever we're talking about Israel-Gaza, whenever we're talking about human sexuality, whether we're talking about politics, the larger the issue, the more time I need in order for me to comprehensively, I think, address this pastorally.
One of the things we've heard from pastors over the last several years, since 2016, but really, really in the wake of the pandemic and the racial justice protests and the 2020 election and January 6th and all the rest, like the pressure has just really amped up in terms of these divisions within churches. that for pastors, it's like you're always upsetting somebody.
Yeah.
I think what you just said, taking time, and it sounds like building trust has been a big part of it, but especially navigating such a diverse church. Like, how do you keep your people together and not fighting over these things or breaking up over issues like this that have broken up a lot of churches?
Oh yeah, they're still fighting. That's for sure. But I think my predecessor was a guy named Pete Scazzaro, and Pete has written a lot on emotionally healthy spirituality, emotionally healthy church, emotionally healthy relationships. And so we have a really significant foundation of emotional health as a baseline to be part of this community. We have courses that we run that we make it mandatory for those who want to be rooted in our church. Like, these are the prerequisites there. And it doesn't mean that just because you take the course, you are living a kind of emotional health that is really good. But I think from a cultural perspective in our church, we have provided particular expectations and equipping to listen well, to name preferences and values, to enter into the space of others, to offer emotionally healthy language, to negotiate our differences well. I think because we have 20 years of this kind of work that we've been doing, whenever a significant issue emerges, there's enough of cultural buy-in with regard to this kind of emotional health stuff that we're able to navigate this probably a bit better because of the work that we've done. It doesn't mean it's perfect. Doesn't mean people are still not leaving the churches. I think that's what's going to happen generally, because not everyone is on the same level there. I don't know if we would be where we're at right now if we haven't focused over the last 20 years on what it means to practice emotional health, pay attention to what's happening on the inside of my own soul, my own family of origin issues, what it means to listen deeply to others and be curious and humble. I think what we're seeing is the fruit of a couple of decades of intentional formation.
And it strikes me that if more churches went on that path of kind of interior reflection, emotional intelligence, deep spiritual formation, there's a kind of flashiness or sexiness that's lost that would have to be forsaken, right? Like, the emphasis would not be as much on like amazing lighting design for Sunday morning worship, or sermon clips that are widely shared on social media, or like all the programming that will attract all the people. It feels like part of this vision and part of what you're describing in your forthcoming book is winnowing down or paring down that would require a pretty big mental shift for a lot of churches.
Slow work too.
Absolutely. It is incredibly slow. And we have to make a decision in terms of where are we going to place our energy, our emphasis, our resources. I love having great Sundays. I mean, get as creative as you like. But if all the energy is being put into making Sunday fantastic week after week after week, there's only so many resources to go around to build other things into the life of the church. Now, New Life is not the best example for this, because for many years, like, our lighting system in our sanctuary in Queens was on and off. That was our lighting system. And so there was like nothing
Are the lights
else.
on? We're ready to go.
Yeah. And like, it's only been like the last 7 years that we've made some adjustments to like, okay, now we got now. This is awesome now. Before it was just off and on. But we're not the best example because we have never been a high programmatic church. We've had some things here or there. But the point still remains. There's only so many resources to go around, only so many people to go around. Where you place your energy will have some significant consequences, whether it's all on Sunday or whether it's not. And so I want strong Sundays and strong gatherings and creative Sundays and all that. But if all of our energy is there, there's going to be other areas in the life of the church that suffer.
I imagine anybody who goes to church, who cares about the church, would sign off on the idea, like, we should support our pastor. We should find ways to encourage them and lift them up and pray for them. I kind of forget to do that. That even seems baseline. But speaking as a pastor, what are some tangible things that people who attend church can do to actually support their pastors, not just in word, but also in deed?
Oh, bagels. I mean, just bring bagels, right? Everything bagels. I think of two things. I think pointed encouragement, goes a long way.
Mm.
I think pastors are used to very generic encouragement, like, hey, great word, pastor, as they're walking out of the church,
Right.
hey, I appreciated that. And it's nice, but it's kind of more of a cultural exchange in that moment, just like it's just what I do. From time to time in our church, whether it's an email, whether it's a note, whether someone leaves something in my desk in the office, just to say, hey, I want to just point out this specific thing that you did and why it's significant, in my opinion. And so I think things like that. I actually have a collection of encouraging notes and letters in a box that whenever I get discouraged or like, why am I doing this thing again? That from time to time I just open up and go, oh yeah, I remember this. Oh, and this was such a life-giving message here to keep me going. So I think pointed encouragement can go a long way. And then secondly, I do think, of course, as a pastor, I'm going to say this, but engagement in the life of our church.
Mm-hmm.
To be part of a church means one of the biblical metaphors is that we're a family as a church. Of course, not every church lives in that way, but as a family, it means that we're here to serve one another. It's what I'm trying to teach my 14-year-old and my 9-year-old right now, that we all have a part to play in this house, whether it means putting dishes away or loading the laundry, whatever it might be. We all have a part to play. And so I think engagement, whenever we're saying, hey, we have 50 elementary students that are in need of small group leaders. It'd be great if we could disciple the next generation in a way that is really sustainable. So it might look different from person to person, but it's very easy just to view church from the perspective of like a stadium, a mall, or a subway car, where we view church as kind of spectators, consumers, or just in a crowd of anonymous people in close proximity to each other, like the 4 train or whatever it might be. And we are called to a bit more than just proximity one day a week. I think what we're looking for is engagement. And that could be a really great support.
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you, Rich. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me. And you are certified New Yorkers, all right?
Oh, thanks.
Right from Rich Villodas. You made it through the pandemic. You're in.
Thank you. That means the world. So it sounds like one of the ways that people in church can help prevent pastoral burnout is by thinking of themselves as more central to what church is and what church is doing.
Yeah, I think that's right, Caitlin. Maybe it's just because it's our jobs. It's what can we do instead of the pastor. But one of the things that Rich was talking about was these different curriculums and classes and different ways that the church was trying to disciple people beyond just Sunday mornings, which Sunday mornings can often feel centered on a pastor, but these other aspects of church life are not as much. Like small groups or community groups or ways of service, talking through these difficult questions in more flat environments, like where people are in a circle talking and there's not like a pastor preaching or teaching at them. I think building trust across the community and building community so that people really are for each other, like that horizontal relationship in the pews.
Yes.
Rather than just nurturing the sort of
top down vertical.
Yeah. But that is hard work, and it's hard work on the part of parishioners, and you have to have a congregation that's willing to do it.
Yeah. I don't know that I'm always willing to do it. And I believe in everything we've just been saying, I support this idea in theory. I want more of a horizontal discipleship model at the local church rather than the top down thing, because I think that breeds all sorts of narcissism and hero worship. But my involvement at church currently does not extend far beyond Sunday morning. It feels like you have to have enough people who are motivated by this vision of the church. And we're all just in consumerist waters where it's tempting to just think of church as I go to get my needs met and then I leave and then I go on to brunch to get my other needs met.
And also our lives are really busy, which is part of consumerism, right? It's part of capitalism. Our lives are being consumed by our jobs, by our all of these other demands on us. And we're also half proud of how busy we are and half burn out ourselves. And so church feels like respite and also like somebody else's responsibility and a place that we can just relax a little.
Yeah.
I mean, you have made quite a few friends at your church over the last couple of years, and that's become really important to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of building community for me too. Like that's a big part of like my involvement with church came about slowly and came about because I got to know more and more and more people and started to feel like, oh, this is a place I belong.
Yeah.
We've talked about this in the context of friendships and different things, but like, I hate to say it, I still really like wonder about the proximity question, like the local parish. And like, if you have to travel a lot further to go to church, it's less likely that you're going to want to do it several times a week or to be part of a bunch more than the Sunday thing.
Yeah. I mean, again, in theory, I'm like, yes, the parish model, it cuts against so much of the stuff.
know,
but I also travel every Sunday 40 minutes on one, maybe two trains to get to the church that I really like and resonate with.
And have friends at.
There's a French-speaking Baptist church down the street. Now, I don't speak French, so maybe I get a pass there. But like, there are many other churches within a half-mile radius, walking distance of where I live. So I will say, when I have seen headlines over the last few years about pastoral burnout, there's something in me that wants to ask, like, is it really that bad? Is this just like some pastors getting pushback or having expectations of ministry that are like very rosy and celebrity oriented, and now they're just being asked to pastor and they don't like it? Basically, I've been dubious about these claims, but I think that flows from a vision of pastors not being human. Big revelation, you guys.
Pastors are people too. So many P's.
I think the thing that I'm resistant to is pastors kind of commiserating with each other about how terrible their congregants are.
Oh.
Like expecting everybody to just be a fan or to like for them to be beloved. And then when you actually encounter real people, you realize I'm not beloved by everybody, nor is that my job. Like that, I think some pastors go into ministry because they want to be loved and like have some emotional baggage that they need to attend to before going into ministry.
Oh, hot take. Saved by the City is a religion news service production. Senior producer is Jay Woodward, and the consulting editor is Paul O'Donnell. Our editor is Julia Wyndham.
Chaz Rousseau put together our look, and Martin Fowler wrote our theme music.
We are Roxy Stone
and Caitlin Beatty.
Thanks for listening.